Okay, thank you very much. The Giants are my second favorite team, but as a hometown LA person, I love the Dodgers. So it's just a great honor to speak with you today. It's such a pleasure. And by the way, uh, the slides are available. If you stay through to the end, there'll be a QR code that you can point your cameras at, and you can see the entire slideshow. So you don't have to frantically take notes. Artificial intelligence is an example of a general purpose technology uh, that has effects across many industries and sectors. Previous GPTs include writing, the printing press, the steam engine, electricity, computers, the internet. These technologies have the potential to drive significant economic growth because they enable new forms of production and increase productivity in existing sectors. Policymakers interested in bolstering economic growth must therefore place major focus on discovery and adoption of these general purpose technologies. They're also very central to inequality, both within and across countries, because those, whether individuals or societies that can understand and adapt them, are much more likely to be successful. Interestingly, David Autor, an MIT economist who was central to previous work showing how earlier digital technologies destroyed jobs and hollowed out the middle class, pointed out that generative AI has the potential to help create a more equitable society by extending the range of expertise to broader numbers of people. So let's see how that works on the ground with a couple of empirical studies. Some of you may have seen these before. They were, publicized the last year or two. There was a study done at MIT where they gave writing and editing tasks to more than 400 employees, half with ChatGPT, half without. The work was graded by evaluators. And they found that the ChatGPT group completed the assignments 40% faster. They received 20% higher scores, and the lower ability workers benefited most. Basically, they spent less time brainstorming and a lot less time drafting and more time editing, which points to some of the new kinds of skills, the importance of teaching editing skills in this era. Another study was done at Harvard where they gave 558 strategy consultants a variety of writing tasks. And this time there were three groups: no AI with ChatGPT, and with ChatGPT and prompt engineering overview. And again, the no AI group did worse. There really wasn't that much difference between the group that did GPT or GPT with the prompt engineering. And again, here you see how this inequality gets expressed. For the top half skilled participants, they improved a little bit once they had access to GPT. For the bottom half skilled participants, they improved a great deal once they had access to GPT, almost catching up with the top half skilled. So it seems really simple, right? But what if everybody doesn't have the skills to use ChatGPT, or is afraid to use generative AI, etc.? So let me give you a couple of examples from my own lab. I get a lot of applications for our PhD program every year, and I hope I'll get some applications from some of the people in this webinar. And so I've learned to triage them. And I try to interact a lot with some of the really strong applicants. And often I'll send them some of my current grant proposals, because that's a way to get, show them exactly what we're doing and get feedback from them. So here was a student who had a master's degree in AI and was working in the AI field. So it was a very strong applicant. And after he contacted me, I said, thank you for applying to our PhD in education program. I wanted to share with you a couple of our recent grant proposals to get your thoughts on them. And very quickly, within a few hours, he emailed me back, emailing me his response. And there were certain things that were kind of strange about his response. He said, I first came across the Converse to Learn project, which focuses on integrating AI dialogue education. I was the one who emailed him. And to say he first came across, those obviously were not his words. He had basically fed both of the proposals into ChatGPT and asked it to respond. And you can imagine that after that, I went to the trouble of sharing my proposals. He didn't even respond in it with his own thoughts. I told him, okay, thank you very much. I'll be in touch. And he was not admitted to our program. Well, here's kind of the opposite situation. We had our own graduate student, undergraduate computer science major who was helping out our projects. And he was applying to graduate school in computer science, and he wrote a very strong statement of purpose. But when I looked at it, there was the content was very good, but there were some sentence level errors, oddities or errors. He was not from this country and wasn't a native speaker of English, and his language was kind of distinctly non-native in ways that I thought might not put his best foot forward. And I suggested to him, maybe I gave him one or two content ideas for strengthening his statement of purpose. And then I said, and maybe you can use ChatGPT to help you fix some of the, minor like grammar or punctuation or spelling things. And he came back with another draft, and the content was better, but the language wasn't really any better. And I asked him, why he didn't do as I suggested. And he said, well, he's afraid to use ChatGPT. He's afraid that they'll discover it somehow, or they'll put it through some detector and, it'll disqualify him for the program. And I said, okay, all of those are really natural fears. I said, you don't have to use ChatGPT. You can use another grammar editing program. You can get a friend of yours who's a native speaker or an excellent writer to help you. Or maybe you can use ChatGPT, but you have to use it in a very careful way. Tell it to keep your own voice, tell it to just point out obvious errors, etc. And then he came back later, and I guess I don't have this slide here, but he gave me a version of this that was cleaned up and read a lot better. And I asked what happened, and he said, well, you were right. I learned to use ChatGPT in sort of a gentle way just to fix my errors, and that worked out. And he ended up getting admitted to a very good graduate school. And he's actually right about some of the threats to English learners. Some of you have heard a lot of talk about GPT detectors, which are not only, very inaccurate, but they're especially inaccurate with English learners. Somebody in a study used 7 GPT detectors on real essays that had been written, a few years back before ChatGPT was made public. And more than half of the TOEFL essays were identified as being supposedly being done with AI, with ChatGPT before ChatGPT even existed. So how to address this? I have some ideas about that, but first I want to share some contradictions to think about when we think about finding ways to address this. The first is what we call the imitation contradiction, and it follows up from the example I just gave. English learners are told to imitate native speaker language, but when they use a tool that can help them produce more native-like output, they can often get accused of academic dishonesty. And my wife, I might add, is a native speaker of Japanese from Japan. She went to undergraduate in Japan, and then she came to graduate school in the US. And she's been here half her life. But still, going from a language like Japanese to a language like English, I see how challenging it is to write like a native speaker. And people around the world spend a huge amount of time and effort, chemists, biology, pharmacists, engineers who have to present and publish their work, spend a huge amount of time and effort trying to produce native-like text. And here they have a free or low-cost tool that can help them a lot, but they feel a risk in using it. Another example is the rich get richer contradiction. AI is incredibly powerful for assisting communication, But to get the most out of it, you need to know how to prompt it well, critically evaluate its output, and edit and incorporate into your work. That leads to the with or without contradiction. If students never learn to use AI, they'll be at a disadvantage in their studies and careers. But if they use it too much and too early, they'll also be at a disadvantage, as they'll be robbed of foundational skills necessary to use it well. And all of that connects to what I call the June-July contradiction. In June, while students are in school, they may get punished for using ChatGPT. However, in July, when they're out in the workforce, they may get punished for not knowing how to use it, as employers care more about efficiency and productivity than they care about authenticity. So we've learned to deal with these kinds of things before, through digital literacy skills, teaching students the skills, knowledge, and attitude to use digital technologies to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information. And we understand that those entail new skills like computer literacy, information literacy, multimodal literacy. Well, we have to add AI literacy to that, because that's a very important new skill for reading, writing, communicating, knowledge production, etc. And in our lab, we've come up with a 5-point framework for introducing AI literacy in schools and universities. The first point is to understand. And of course, that in itself, you could teach an entire course on how to understand LLMs and how they function and what their strengths and weaknesses and biases are. But I like to start with a simple example of autocomplete in Gmail. And so it gets people to understand that, autocomplete, it's not a brain, it's not an intelligence. We don't blame it for hallucinating, because we recognize that all it's doing is looking for patterns in earlier emails that people have written. And basically try to get across the point that at bottom, generative AI is just a pattern recognition and production tool. And is it 1,000,000 times more powerful than autocomplete? Yes, but it has the same underlying strengths and weaknesses. Here's something, a cool thing that was developed for school contexts, where somebody showed how you could use, a mini language model simply on Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss, to show with various weighting, what expressions of words are most likely to come after each other. The next example is, next area is access. We have to teach them how to access a wide range of AI tools appropriate for specific communication tasks. And there's so many, they're proliferating daily, but students need to understand the difference between free apps and paid apps, apps that they get via API, standalone apps, ones that are integrated into tools, whether they're collecting their data, whether there's threats to their privacy, what biases might be involved, etc. At UCI, we're one of the first universities in the country to provide free access to GPT-4o, to Microsoft Copilot, to Google Gemini, and we have we have protection of privacy as part of that. None of the data is safe for training. We have a special reduced rate. Students and staff and faculty get it for free, but we've negotiated at the UC level a reduced rate for the University of California. And I think more and more universities will be moving in this direction. Of course, prompting, as you've all heard, is a really important area in generative AI. And this is one really helpful, clear, free article that I like to point to, written by Ethan Mollick and Lilith Mollick, who are two of the really interesting thinkers about generative AI in education. and they give a lot of examples of how to write a good prompt to explain the role and the goal, to give very step-by-step instructions, to explain the pedagogy involved, to explain any constraints, to explain them how they can personalize it, and they give some nice examples of how that can be done. And the last thing is corroborate. And you all probably have lots of interesting examples from your own lives, but I'll just show you a few from mine. So one of the first things I did when ChatGPT came out was I asked it to write a biography of me. And it did a pretty good job through the first 2 paragraphs until I got to the last paragraph. And as a great an admirer I am of Stanford University, I have yet to be a visiting scholar there. I'm waiting for the invitation. Maybe after this it'll come. I also haven't been a visiting scholar at Harvard or at Cambridge. Then sometimes I do when I'm talking to people who are more directly in my research area related to language and literacy and technology. I ask them to look through these. I ask ChatGPT to list the 10 most important papers written by me, and then I'll show this list to people and ask them if they can figure out which ones are real and which ones are not. And it turns out that 6 of them were written by me, and 4 of them are invented titles. And the next one is one of my favorite examples. I taught a class on AI in education, and I had a final project, and some of the students in the class created a deep fake of me. And let's see if you can hear that.
Good afternoon. I would like to give everyone a perfect grade in this class because all of you are so cool. Also, shout out to Jacob for being the best one in the room.
Jacob is the person who gave that presentation. So I didn't say any of those things. He made that in an hour or 2, and it's pretty easy to make these things that was using my voice.
Good afternoon.
So one thing that this calls to attention, here's a nice connection to Stanford. There's a Stanford professor of education named Sam Weinberg, who's been doing work on information literacy for a long time. And he has talked about in the information era, we need to go from vertical reading to lateral reading. You know, when the internet first came out, people were trying to teach what he calls vertical reading approaches, basically meaning we have to dig deeper and deeper into documents to look at, you know, what's funny about them, you know, what the fonts look like, who the authors are, you know, what it says, who wrote it, da 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 da. But actually, he realized working with professional fact checkers that it was much more efficient and effective instead of doing that kind of vertical reading to do lateral reading. So if you read an outlandish or even a non-outlandish claim on a website, you go to other websites, trusted websites, to say if they were saying the same thing. And that was a good way to do an information literacy check. And in the age of AI, we really need to do that. Yes, we can teach people to look for the obvious things, like why does that kid have 7 fingers or something? But as AI gets better and better and better and better, and nobody's going to be able to perfectly check every AI, but they need to learn the skills of going to other trusted sources and compare them. Next is incorporate. And I thought I did a case study of one of our students at UCI that I thought is quite interesting, how she worked with generative AI. So she's a graduate student from China, and though she's a non-native speaker who didn't major in English, she's really one of the best writers among any graduate student I've encountered. And she does that by working in a very highly interactive way with generative AI for brainstorming, researching, composing, and editing. She might start by asking it to give her some ideas for her research, to elaborate on those ideas, to express some concerns, to tell it pros and cons. And then once she starts settling on a topic, she might ask it to dig in to help plunge through the research for her and help find research studies and backgrounds, which again, she corroborates. Now, interestingly, a lot of people might not approve of this, but she comes up with outlines and then asks it to draft text for her based on those outlines. And then after she does that, she works it in her own language. She revises it. She makes sure that it feels comfortable in her voice. And then she asks her to revise it using academic language. So this is a really interesting case study. To me, it pushes the boundaries of what people would find acceptable or unacceptable, but it's interesting thoughts about how graduate students might be using generative AI and certainly a lot of professionals as well. So based on this work, to continue to focus, we wanted to continue to focus on AI literacy. And we wanted to do so in the area of writing because that's something I've been doing research on for a long time. And we started by doing research on feedback. So we had a corpus of a few hundred essays that were written by school children that had received feedback according to a detailed rubric from expert human scores. And then we fed those same essays into ChatGPT. We were using GPT 3.5, which is the earlier model that people aren't using anymore, and the rubric. So no fancy training sets, no fine tuning, just, here's the rubric, please give feedback on these. And we got the feedback from them. So I'd like to ask you quickly to read over both of these and for a second and tell me which you think is which is human and which is ChatGPT generated. So Kurt or Laura, do you want to make a guess?
I'm reading it. I want to say the first one because the second one seems more personal to me, but they're both well written. So I'm really just guessing for the record.
Well, that was a well-informed guess. You're actually right. But one of the things we did, we then took all these hundreds of examples of feedback and blinded them. Which one was ChatGPT, which one was humans, and gave them to another group of experts to score the feedback to see which gave better feedback. And interestingly, they gave the humans a little bit higher in most areas. Support of essential features, accuracy, clear direction. AI was a little bit better in covering all the criteria. But it was close enough that we saw that the feedback would be really useful for students, for formative feedback for students. Then we wanted to try scoring. So we had hundreds of essays that had been scored by 2 humans, and we looked at the correlations in scoring. And 74% of the time, one human agreed with another human within 1 point on a 6-point scale. And 76% of the time, AI agreed with the human on within 1 point, a 6-point scale. So it was actually a little bit more reliable. Now, again, both of these studies were with GPT 3.5 without any special training. So we're confident we can do better. So we decided to take this kind of information and build it some of our grant work. And out of this, we developed a tool which we call Papyrus AI. And it's a walled garden to teach writing and AI literacy. It's a web portal to GPT-4. It gives students free access to use evidence-based ways to improve their writing, teach AI literacy, protect their privacy, leverage teachers' time. Students can log in and select among options to help plan or revise their writing and put in their texts. And teachers can log in and choose the prompts and modules to assign to their students and also get reports on how students use the tool. And then there's a lot of other instructional resources. We really see it as a tool, not just for writing, but for AI literacy development. So let me show you a quick 3-minute video about that.
Hi, and welcome to Papyrus AI. Papyrus AI is a generative AI tool we've developed to support students with their writing and AI literacy. It's available 24/7 for students, and it provides real-time, customized advice and feedback to help students improve their writing according to their needs and learn to use AI effectively, all while keeping student data safe and secure, as no student data is retained for training purposes. We know that many students find writing challenging. That's why we've designed Papyrus AI to scaffold the writing process by walking alongside the student from pre-writing to revision. Here's an example of a student working with Papyrus AI to brainstorm their topic for an essay. This can be a great way for students struggling to come up with ideas to write about or narrow down to specific topics. Here, the student is working with the AI to find an idea that they are interested in writing about for their class assignment. As you can see, the tool is responsive to the student's request for more suggestions, as well as their idea to bring in a relevant interest into their writing. In addition to using Papyrus AI to help with brainstorming and ideation, students can also ask for feedback on their writing, even from home. Here, the student is asking for feedback on their introduction paragraph about the topic they brainstormed with Papyrus AI just previously. After the student provides some details about the assignment, the AI can offer encouragement on what they are doing well, as well as some suggestions on how to improve their introduction further. These can be helpful starting points for students as they revise their writing, and if they'd like, they can continue working with Papyrus AI to understand how to act on the feedback provided. For teachers, we wanted Papyrus AI to be responsive to what works for their classrooms. So we've made sure that teachers are able to control and monitor how students are interacting with Papyrus AI. Here's one example of how teachers can tailor the tool to their students' needs. When creating a module, or the space in which students interact with the AI, teachers can choose the specific prompts they want their students to have access to. They can also turn on or off specific functionalities, such as whether students are able to follow up with custom messages to the AI with continued interactions. They can even allow students to receive automatic scores according to teacher or school rubrics. These options can be changed for specific assignments or for the whole course. Teachers will also have access to a dashboard that shows them when and how their students interact with the platform. I hope that this was a helpful introduction to Papyrus AI. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to working with you. Hi, and welcome to Papyrus.
So we've been implementing this in university and middle school classes. We've gotten great feedback from students. I typically struggle in the early stages of writing because the ideas in my brain are scattered. AI helps me create outlines and organize the ideas. I used to be super against using generative AI because I thought it was cheating, but now I see it's a tool for using it responsibly. This is fantastic. Here's one Native American student who was telling us they went on an internship interview and it went great after they shared with the recruiter about their experience working with AI. We've done research in classes. We've learned some lessons. It works best if students think first before they use the AI. Don't just jump into it. Decent prompting, but doesn't have to be perfect. They really have to be the boss to decide what they're going to use and not they're going to use. And they have to corroborate information, and they really need to reflect on their experience so they can learn, because this isn't going away. So they have to learn what works well to write by themselves, what works well to use generative AI, and what works well to seek help from other people. We're continuing to improve this and scale it up. I'm going to give you a link to the slides, and then when you come to this page, if any of you are interested in using this into your institution, there's a Google form you can fill out. It says Papyrus email updates. And you also have we give free access to our prompt bank if you want to see any of the prompts that we're using. So I'm going to finish with a few quick quotes. I want to leave about 10 minutes for questions and answers, but these are some of my favorite quotes related to technology and learning. Gregory Bateson: suppose I'm a blind man and I use a stick. I go tap, tap, tap. where do I start? Is my mental system bounded at the handle of the stick? Is it bounded at my skin? Does it start halfway up the stick? Does it start at the tip of the stick? This points to how these tools really become part of our thinking process rather than separate from them. Technologies are not mere exterior aids, but also interior transformations of consciousness, and never more than when they affect the word. And my favorite, this was written, almost 40 years ago, but it's so relevant till today. Shoshana Zuboff did research on a lot of companies that were just starting to incorporate a much earlier stage of information technology. And she noticed two distinct processes. On the one hand, there were companies that sought to automate to increase productivity by removing human agency and skill from the process. And there were companies that sought to informate, meaning taking advantage of these technologies to provide more information, knowledge, and skill to employees so that they could have more agency and control. And she found that those companies that not only automated, but also informated were the most successful. And at the end of her book, she says, the informated organization relies on the human capacities for teaching and learning, criticism, and insight. It reflects the interdependence between the human mind and one of its most sophisticated productions. As one worker mused, if you don't let people grow and develop and make more decisions, it's a waste of human life, a waste of human potential. If you don't use your knowledge and skill, it's a waste of life. Using this new technology to the full potential means using the person to the full potential. Everything, all the text, all the images on large language models, they came from us. They represent the interdependence between our minds and our own sophisticated productions. And the best way to empower people in this new society is to give them full knowledge and control about how to use these powerful tools and interact with them. Thank you very much. Here's a link to the slides. It says sides, but it should say slides. And there's some other information on me, and I'd be happy to take 10 minutes of questions.
Thank you very much. I actually have a question for myself.
Okay.
The June, July reference really resonated with me. We use a lot of student workers, and I have a lot of staff too. But it seems like there's a lot of talk in higher education, basically minimize use of AI. But when they came to work with me, I was kind of like, hey, literally just what you said, the opposite. I'm hiring you to do a task. I want you to be as most efficient as possible. And if anything, I would actually be upset if you did not use AI and the tools that are available to you to perform these tasks. And so in the context of continuing education in the workforce, how do we, I hate to say push it more, but how do we upskill people and make sure people understand that AI is a tool that not only that they can use, but that they should be using?
Well, that's a great question. I thought you were going to talk about universities more generally, and I was going to talk about, we do more than just workforce training and da. I still think it should be integrated, but, how to do, poses different situations. But in continuing education and workforce training, I mean, it's criminal, Kurt, if we're not doing it. And maybe, we need to bring employers in to talk about what's going in the workforce and what kind of people they're looking for. Because, I remember I had one speaker, he said, I used to be in the military, the military, nobody cares about plagiarism. They just care about getting the information out and getting it to people. And of course, we have to be concerned about plagiarism, but you're such a great example. So I think that there's two things. One is, I think we need to convince people of its importance, and maybe bringing in the voices of employers could help with that. But then I also think we have to show them how, because it's not easy to do so. And if every single instructor is starting from scratch to try to figure out how, that can be tough. So, I mean, we've done it in Papyrus AI to try to do writing, in our business school here. They're creating a lot of prompts and models. So I think this has to go sort of above the instructor level, where units really have to build instructional tools and approaches that are easier for people to use, because it's not just a matter of, go to ChatGPT and do it. So I think it's those two things.
Great, thank you. I don't know if you can see the chat. There are a
I
couple.
can't see, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the, if I can figure out how to stop the, stop sharing here. Okay. Where do we start to learn to use these tools? I'm a beginner and love to know where to go to increase literacy and how I could be certified. How might we reward the learning process? Okay. Oh, these are separate questions. So the first one, if I put in this chat, I don't know if I put in the chat if people can see it.
I do not think they can.
Okay, well, there's a guy named Ethan Mollick, MolethanMollick. He's in the business school at Penn and Wharton, and he's written so much useful things about how to use these tools in educational contexts. And a lot of them are very practical. I'm sure that there's certificate courses that are coming up and this and that, but I would start by looking at the work of just Google him and go to his webpage and start to look at his many publications, because they have a lot of really practical things in this. How might we reward the learning process versus the output, so students could be rewarded for using AI in their process with reflection about how they used it? And I'm a big fan of using permanent AI responsibly. How do we also balance that with incredibly high energy use, particularly for images and videos? Wow, you guys don't waste any time on the difficult questions. I think we need to, for the question about rewarding it for the process, we need to build these things in as part of these learning processes. I was indicating before that we learned that reflection is a really important part of the process. Let's have assignments about that. Let's students have, show what they use the AI for, and then reflect on it, and then talk about the strengths and weaknesses of doing so. Let's have students develop exercises for others to use AI. So again, it's less like you got an A because you produced this great poem that ChatGPT could do in a second, but you had to demonstrate that you're reflecting on it. High energy use. It's, who knows? Well, this is going to play out. One of the things we're seeing, for example, is that, ChatGPT 4.0 it costs about half as much as ChatGPT 4, and that's partly reflecting the fact that it uses a lot less energy. ChatGPT 4.0 Mini, which just came out, uses 3.5% as much, costs 3.5 as much as ChatGPT 4.0. So I think these things, it's unclear over time how energy intensive these things are going to be. I think we're going to find ways over time to make them less energy intensive. But in in the long run, we just have to find ways of using energy which are carbon free. And that's probably the more important approach to that.
Another thing that resonated with me, and I'm kind of curious, maybe you can tell how you do it personally, but in the workforce, what are the ethics about sharing how much do you use AI when you produce something? Again, I'm not talking about in scholarly work, I'm just talking about like in your general work. So if you do something for your boss and she thinks it took you 3 days to do, but because you used AI, it took you 2 hours. Or, another example I've used is, you use the example where a student sent you something that was clearly done by AI. And I've done that myself. And, the joke internally might be, do you chat GPT much kind of thing? Like how much should you do that? Because from my perspective, from a writing perspective, you should pretty much assume everything I write, I might have ran through some kind of AI. Because I feel it's almost at the very least, it's almost like a spell check. But it can get me 50% there, 60% there. I just find it very efficient.
Yeah.
And so I'm struggling a little bit with my team and myself personally on how much I don't want to constantly say, yeah, well, AI helped do that.
So I think this is oversold. So there's the idea, lots of situations, you're supposed to report any use of AI. I might write a 15-page grant proposal, and I'm unhappy how in one paragraph on page 4, I use the same word twice in a sentence. And I just go to ChatGPT and say, can you rewrite this sentence and give me a synonym for this? And they do. Am I supposed to put a footnote on the grant proposal saying that, I use ChatGPT to find a synonym for a word on page 4? So I think this is overdone. In university settings, it's somewhat different because that's in a place where there's the expectation of the originality of work. And I think that that's much more important. But, if I'm out and I'm reading things and communication, I communicate with I was down on that one student for the way that they used ChatGPT because it was clear that they didn't read or think about what I sent them to. But I hear from lots of graduate students all around the world, and their email messages are beautifully written. And I assume they're using AI, and that's absolutely fine with me. And I don't expect them to tell me about it or apologize for it. So I think unless you're in a situation where where the expectation is otherwise, like you're doing work in a class for professor, I personally don't think that disclosure is necessary.
There are a couple more questions. One's for me. I'll just answer that really quickly. I would say that what Stanford CME does is we do. By the way, the question is, does your team use it to help write practice gaps, needs assessments, or leave it fully up to the course directors? I would say that our team uses AI extensively, but at the end of the day, most people on our team are not clinicians, and so for medical related matters, we are going to be relying on course directors and actual physicians. It would not surprise me to hear that they occasionally will use AI in some of those questions, but I'm not really totally privy to that. If you ever hear me talk about AI, I always think of it as a great tool, but it's really much more effective if you're the subject matter expert and you have the ability to review whatever it's saying to kind of, in essence, check it to make sure that it's accurate. And then the other 2 questions are for you, Mark.
Is there a certification for AI? I'm sure there's a lot of them, but I don't know of any in particular. Maybe Kurt knows more about that. And my thoughts on asking students to cite their use of AI. Again, it's hard to talk about where to draw the line because there's Grammarly, there's spell check, there's so many things. So I personally don't do it, but I have no problems, with other faculty who want to do it.
Great. I think we're running out of time, so I just want to say thank you. I can't promise you a a visiting scholar position, but I can buy you a Stanford hat for your next presentation.
How
So
about, listen, when the Dodgers are playing the Giants, well, the A's are moving, I guess, but when the Dodgers are playing the Giants, we'll go out and catch a game up